Give a brief history of the U.S.-China cyber conflict and in U.S.-China cyber relations.
It's a long story. I highly recommend starting with my book that I wrote last year, William Abbot Foster, PhD, Special White Paper on U.S.-China Cyber Relations. It's available on Amazon. Kindle and paper. I recommend the paper because it's both in English and in Mandarin.
Tell us more about the PLA's loss of face and the Taiwan election incident.
Back in 1996, in the Taiwanese elections, there was a debate of whether Taiwan should be an independent country or part of China. The Chinese government made it very clear that if Taiwanese voted for independence, they would launch missiles on Taiwan. What they weren't counting on was the U.S. sending 2 aircraft carriers and 20 submarines right into the Taiwanese straits. The PLA wasn't ready for that. They backed down. They lost total face, lack of face, which is the worst thing that can happen to a Chinese, to lose face in the Communist Party. As a result, the PLA and the Ministry of State Security, the Chinese Gestapo, decided they needed to penetrate the U.S. military-industrial complex. They sent Chinese students to America to put USB cards in their professors' cards so that basically people with a Raytheon, working at Hughes, working at Lockheed Martin, where the F-35 was made, they could download the plans to the F-35 in 35 seconds. This is all in a white paper published that was in the Washington Post, a white paper from the Defense Science Board.
What happened in May of 2014 regarding the U.S. government and the 5 PLA officers, and what did that mean for U.S.-China relations?
Well, the Obama administration was desperate to finger some of the some Chinese. So they actually fingered 4 PLA officers, not Ministry of State Security. The Ministry of State Security was actually the one who was hacking into the F-35, all the technology. They didn't go after the Ministry of State Security. They went after PLA officers who knew nothing, who were just in their spare time hacking.
Tell us more about the lessons of America positioning itself as the smiling tiger, limits of panda huggers, and dragon slayers.
Well, I was sent by the U.S. military as a panda hugger. They thought that because I had worked for Congressman Walter Fauntroy, a lieutenant to Martin Luther King, and because I was a professor or a PhD student, I might be able to penetrate Chinese society much better than the typical military person, the Army intelligence who saw themselves as a dragon slayer. I argue that both metaphors are wrong. China most respects a smiling tiger, someone who smiles and is friendly, does not make them lose face, and yet if they make a mistake, they're dead.
What about the lesson of U.S.-Russian nuclear deterrence relations on U.S.-China cyber relations?
Senator McCain is right. The most important conflict the U.S. must face is Russia, Putin. What are we going to do about him? What are we going to do about the fact that if we launch a missile on Russia, the Chinese may have that missile go back and bomb New York City?
What is the role of social media-driven analytics in U.S.-China cyber relations?
Well, the real key thing is there are no one right answer to the question of what's going to happen in the war that's currently going on between China, Russia, Israel, and Persia, and Anonymous, and WikiLeaks. No, there's no one sure. There are potential scenarios. There are Bayesian statistics about which ones will go. So how do we generate those scenarios? That's really the question. One of the ways we've seen with Trump the power of social media. What we need to do is extract rules from that social media to program agent models so that we can generate scenarios and have a sense of what kinds of actions will result in world peace and which will result in worldwide destruction.
What can we learn from deep Chinese culture, such as the role of secret societies and U.S.-China cyber relations?
Have you ever seen Bruce Lee? Have you ever seen the movies up at the Tongs? To understand how the Chinese Ministry of State Security works, you need to understand that they are Shaolin Kung Fu monks and Tai Chi masters. They're Taoist. The Shaolin monks are Buddhists. The Tai Chi masters are Taoists. They hate each other, and yet they have created something that is far more dangerous than Putin.
Talk about a scenario with cooperation in global cyberspace?
One area is epidemiology. My father worked for the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization in fighting smallpox, Lassa fever, Ebola. Social media provides ways of getting a real handle on epidemics before they destroy the planet, before there are viruses.
What about a scenario of U.S.-China virtual adversaries?
We need to be smiling tigers. We need to respect the Chinese. We need to not do things that do not have them lose face, like we saw in the Taiwan Straits incident. We need to smile at them, but behind the smile is a tiger. They know that if they once again do an OPM on the U.S., I don't need to say more.
What about the DNC?
The DNC was so easy to hack compared to what Snowden did, what Manning did, what the Chinese did to OPM. It was an easy hack. But Putin never should have done it. The real interesting question is, we had defined critical infrastructures that if the Russians attacked, we were going to declare war on them. We did not include interfering in our elections as a critical infrastructure. We should make it very clear to the Russians, Putin, I would be very straight. Putin, you ever try and mess in our elections again, and you're dead.
Of course he did. The government wiretaps all of us, not only in the United States, but worldwide. Kaplan, in his book, Dark Territory, The Secret History of Cyber War, devotes the last chapter to what he calls the haystack. Basically, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that it is appropriate for the U.S. military to collect every phone and email in the world. That means everything. And then it has ruled that it's permissible for them to look at the headers, who they're calling, what number they called from, who sent the email, who received the email. So Kaplan makes it very clear that it is totally legal for NSA to collect all the phone and email traffic in the world and store it in a data center in Utah, a data center so big that it takes a whole nuclear plant to run it. He also makes clear that it is perfectly appropriate for the government to look at these headers even if it's American citizens, even if it is President-elect Trump or even candidate Trump. His stuff's in there, his stuff's in the data center just as much as yours and I's. The real question, of course, is that Kaplan does not go into the question of using artificial intelligence to make connections between all the data that's collection from the headers. This is the real issue we need to deal with. We are using artificial intelligence to profile people and potential criminals without a warrant. In my mind, this is a violation of the U.S. Constitution and of Trump's constitutional rights. If artificial intelligence fingered Russia and certain phone calls, and those phone calls were then looked at without a warrant, that is, in my mind, a violation of the U.S. Constitution, and if a military officer was involved, it is treason.